With the rise of digital entertainment, computer animation has also risen alongside it, whether that be in mediums such as TV, films, or video games. There is no denying that computer animation has made its mark as a staple within the entertainment industry. Due to its growing popularity, it is my goal to attain a job as an animator within this growing industry. In this past year, I have learned a great deal about computer animation, and I have really pushed myself to get better when creating each individual project. And now I have just finished my final end of year project. I feel this project in particular encapsulates everything I have learned from this past year or so I'd like to look back and discuss this development process. The first stages of development on this project started way back in January this year. I randomly came up with this idea for a project called Dogzilla while waiting for a bus. The premise of this project is rather simple. It revolves around a giant rabid dog that is on a destructive rampage around an urban city environment. I really liked this idea, so I created an initial animatic which helped me further develop this idea. When initially brainstorming this idea, I wanted to create something that is very entertaining to watch and is also rather humorous. Something that is similar in tone to that found back in more classical animated cartoons that don't take themselves too seriously and always prioritize humor in terms of the narrative and tone. Another main reason for wanting to settle on this idea is that my last project I created back in the spring is a more serious, gritty and action-driven short film that is set in a science fiction environment that focuses a lot more on character fight scenes. So my gut instinct immediately wanted to create something that is completely different and contrasts everything in that project in terms of the visual style and tone. By doing this, it allows me to have a much more diverse portfolio of animated short films that vary in terms of style and tone. And it also shows that I am adaptable to working within multiple different genres of animated storytelling, which is a trait that is very desirable in this ever-growing and diverse industry of computer animation. However, before I begin to talk about the actual development on this final summer project, I need to step back and talk about the development for my spring project and the lessons I learned from it. This is important because the working conditions on which I made that project and my summer project were quite different, to say the least.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
During March this year, a global pandemic occurred because of a new deadly disease which had no vaccine. This forced the world to go into lockdown. It put the entertainment industry on hold and forced employees to work remotely from home. This also applied to universities, and students were no longer able to access their facilities, myself included, and because of this it affected everything, especially the outcome of my spring project, as I was unable to use the university facilities and the rent farm. The effects of the lockdown are still felt today and will be for the foreseeable future. A main reason as to why I was able to finish this project on the scale that it was is that I had to reuse a lot of old assets, mainly my futuristic city environment from my end of year undergraduate project, which took a lot of time in itself to make. So, as soon as I was done developing my spring project, I started to think about how I was going to tackle this summer project. As the spring project and the summer project are very similar in terms of scope and the amount of work that needs to go into them, I need to create a whole new plethora of 3D models and assets for which were going to be used in the large-scale environment for the rubber duck to rampage through. And creating 3D environment models on this scale can be rather time-consuming, as I found out from working on my undergraduate project. So I decided to work with a fellow classmate and animator, Cameron Green. By making this final project a group project, it allowed us to be much more ambitious in terms of scope, which is just what I needed for this project idea to come to life. So Cameron was immediately on board and got to work creating environment models and assets, while I focused on creating character models and setting up the rigging elements. During this stage, we settled on the art design of the project. We decided to make the project look stylized and cartoon-like. To accomplish this, we decided to implement the Arnold Toon shader into every single asset in the animation. Neither of us had used this shader before, so it was a lot of fun going through the settings and seeing what worked and what didn't. We put a heavy emphasis on simplistic and colourful designs to help convey that light-hearted, cartoony look. It complemented the overall tone of the narrative of the project, as mentioned earlier. When animating the duck, I really tried to make it look like this thing was heavy, as it is a very large moving character. so I try to make it look like there is a lot of weight in each step as it strides across the landscape. I feel like I got a lot better at conveying this weight in the next few scenes, as I had spent more time getting familiar with how this thing would move. After this, we started looking ahead on how we should be dividing the workload between us for the next few scenes to maximize our time efficiency. Cameron said it'd be up for animating everything in the reporter scene because that was a very demanding scene and there was going to be a lot going on inside of that. He also said he wanted to try experimenting with incorporating a destructible building into that scene. Meanwhile, I animated every other scene leading up to it. In these next two scenes, I feel like I got the hang of animating the giant duck and how it conveyed its presence and weight. I also feel like I did a good job of animating the people running away from it, as they show a lot of emotion as they run. At this point in time, Cameron had now decided on how he was going to tackle the destructible building in his reporter scene. His way of going about it was to separate the wall into individual chunks and animate each part individually. In the final shot, it does get the job done, though I feel it would have been a lot better to do it as a simulation with lots of smaller chunks, as it would have looked a lot more realistic. Another comment to add is that we both had different styles of animating speech. Cameron's style is more fast and rapid, while mine is a bit more slower and more fluid. It's not a big deal, but it would have been nice to have some consistency between us. The next noteworthy scene is the tank scene. I wanted to try challenge myself and to try find a way to animate rotating tank treads. So after spending a lot of time researching on how to accomplish this, I settled upon using the Mash Curves feature. This allowed me to use a seamless tread animation, and it also allowed me to manipulate the speed of each individual tread. I also ended up creating a basic rig for the tank, as it had several moving parts that were to move individually from one another. After I had finished animating that scene, I moved on to the next scene, which involved a guy yelling absurdly at the duck as to what has to be the most humorous scene in the project, so I was very eager to animate it. I spent a lot of time carefully animating the lip sync to the speech, and I feel like I did a pretty good job with it. I also feel like I nailed the expressions of the character as they matched the tone of the scene. It really made me smile once I had finished it and watched it back for the first time. So finally, the last scene of significance was the jet fighter scene. I decided to differ from the previous and chose to have the jet fire rockets instead of shooting bullets, as the explosion would have a much more interesting effect on the duck, which allows for more appealing animation. I also went the extra mile and added a new part of the scene which shows off an internal view of the jet cockpit that shows the pilot firing the rockets for a more cinematic experience. Once all the scenes were animated and rendered, I got to work on the post-production side of things, as the project needed a few special effects. The most notable effects were the explosions, the lasers, and the fire. To accomplish this, I simply animated physical mesh in the Maya scene and rendered it out as its own separate layer. I then put that layer on top of the base footage in After Effects and added a glow effect. I'm not too sure if this method of adding effects isn't used in more professional areas of video editing within the industry, but at the end of the day, I'm an animator, not a VFX artist. But even so, the effects still do a pretty good job at conveying their purpose. I feel like the lasers, the tank shot, and the fire in particular were a lot better than the explosions. I couldn't really think of a better way to add in explosions other than simulating them in Maya. However, I don't really have this much knowledge in this area, so I decided to stick to my own method of using physical mesh. So all in all, I feel like we did a pretty good job of the project. We accomplished what we set out to create, however we acknowledge that there could still be more room for improvement, such as adding even more people running away from the duck so the streets look a little bit more livelier, or using simulations in elements such as Cameron's destructible building or with the explosions. I also wish me and Cameron had a bit more of a consistent style when animating speech, but these are small nitpicks. We're still very happy with the end result of the project. The main things to take away from this project is that we have demonstrated that we can adapt our working conditions to work remotely from home and to effectively work closely and collaborate with one another to bounce back ideas. We have also proved that we are able to effectively execute conceptualized ideas to a quality that meets our expectations. This is all very relevant considering the state of the entertainment industry right now and how employees are working remotely from home in this current point in time. We feel that this project is pretty much nearly up to the standards of what you would find in an animated film or television show in terms of quality. However, in terms of runtime and scope, it's a little bit smaller, which is expected considering companies will have numerous employees working on one single project. But considering the state of the level that we are at, we are very proud of what we have created, and we are ready to dive headfirst into the entertainment industry and work on various mediums of computer animation.